All right, so today we're diving into something pretty interesting, strategies for legally minimizing child support payments.
Sounds a little dicey, but I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's definitely a sensitive topic, but we're not here to give legal advice or anything like that. We're just going to take a look at what this Wisconsin lawyer, Kyle Kaufman, has to say about it.
Okay, so what's our source material?
His YouTube video titled, Get This, 4 Tips on How to Legally Avoid Paying Child Support. He's got this whole 4 C's framework, but
C's, okay, I'm all ears.
before we get into that,
Oh.
I want to make it clear that this isn't about like dodging your responsibilities, you know.
Right, of course.
It's more about strategically navigating the system to make
Yep.
sure, well, to make sure everything's fair and you're not getting taken advantage of.
Gotcha. So less about avoiding payments, more about making informed decisions.
Exactly. And Kaufman seems to be pretty big on that whole informed part. So first up in his 4 C's is consult.
Consult, okay.
Yeah, he's like adamant that anyone dealing with child support needs to talk to a lawyer first thing.
Well, yeah, that makes sense, right? Like, you got to know the rules of the game before you start playing.
Exactly.
Every state's different when it comes to child support laws. A lawyer can help you figure out what applies to your situation, like what your options even are.
It's like walking into a negotiation blindfolded, right?
Oh, totally. You're just asking for trouble.
Kaufman really stresses the importance of understanding all the factors involved, like how child support is calculated, what a court looks at, what your rights are.
It's all about being prepared.
Exactly. All right, so after consult comes, communicate.
Communicate. So is he talking about like mediation or something?
It's actually a bit more nuanced than that. He's really big on listening first.
Listening. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, like really understanding the other parent's perspective before you even bring your own ideas to the table.
Huh. I guess most people just go in guns blazing trying to present their case.
Right. It's surprising, but Kaufman's point is that when you really listen to someone, it makes them feel heard and respected. And that can make a huge difference in how they respond to you.
It's almost like disarming them, right? Like
Yeah.
it takes away that defensiveness.
Think about it this way. Has you ever had someone really listen to you? Like, no interruptions, no judgment.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Didn't it make you more open to hearing what they had to say?
Definitely. It builds trust, which is probably pretty important in this situation.
Exactly. So Kaufman seems to be saying that building that trust through communication is key before you even start talking specifics about the child support.
It sets a more collaborative tone.
Right. And that brings us to the third C, create.
Create, what's that all about?
This one's all about exploring alternative ways to handle the child support.
Alternative, what, like bartering babysitting hours or something?
Uh-huh. No, not quite. He's talking about things like directly contributing to healthcare costs, educational expenses, extracurricular activities, things like that.
Ah, so instead of just sending a check, you're directly involved in those specific costs.
Exactly. And Kaufman argues that this can actually be beneficial in a couple of ways. First, it's more tailored, instead of just a generic sum, you're focusing on what the child actually needs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And second, it kind of takes some of the guesswork out of it. The money's going towards those specific things.
Okay, but what if one parent tries to use that to control everything?
That's a good point. It definitely requires a lot of trust, which, let's be honest, might not be realistic in every situation.
Yeah, and how do you even make sure it's all fair? Like, if one parent is covering specific expenses, is the overall burden still balanced?
That's a great question, and honestly, something Kaufman doesn't really address. I guess it would depend on the specifics of each case.
Definitely something to think about.
All right, so the fourth and final C is certainty.
Certainty, okay.
This one's all about, having control over the outcome as much as possible.
I'm guessing this ties back into getting legal advice early on.
It does. Kaufman's point is that if you and the other parent can reach an agreement together, that gives you way more certainty than if you leave it up to a court to decide.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like you're taking charge instead of letting someone else dictate what happens.
Right, it's about having agency.
Think about it. If you had to make a major life decision, wouldn't you rather be the one making the choice?
Absolutely.
And when we're talking about something as emotionally charged as child support, that sense of control is huge.
For sure.
So those are Kaufman's 4 C's: consult, communicate, create, and certainty.
It's a pretty interesting framework.
We've already touched on some of the potential issues and nuances, but there's definitely more to unpack. In the next part, we'll get into the legal and ethical considerations a bit more. And we'll explore how these C's might actually play out in real-world situations.
Sounds like a plan. Okay, so picking up where we left off, it seems like the whole point of these C's is to be proactive, right?
Yeah, it's about taking control of the situation instead of just reacting to whatever gets thrown at you.
And that starts with consult. Talking to a lawyer early on can really help you avoid some major headaches down the line.
Totally. It's about knowing what you're getting into, understanding your options, your rights, all that good stuff.
And that leads us right into communicate, which Kaufman seems to be pushing for a more collaborative approach rather than like a fight, you know?
Yeah, it's about working together, even if it feels kind of impossible sometimes.
But it's important, right? If you can find some common ground and focus on what's best for the kid, that's got to make things easier.
Absolutely. It sets a much more positive tone for the whole thing. And that brings us to create, which
Create, right. Remind me what that one's about again.
this is where you start getting creative with the child support arrangements.
Yeah.
Like maybe instead of just sending a check every month, you directly contribute to certain expenses.
Right, right. Like the healthcare and stuff.
Exactly. And we talked about some of the potential issues with that, like fairness and control.
Yeah, how do you make sure it's all balanced? And that one parent isn't calling all the shots.
Well, I think documentation is super important in those cases. Like having really clear agreements about who's paying for what and keeping track of everything.
Ah, so no one can come back later and say, hey, you never paid for this.
Exactly. And this is where having a lawyer can be really helpful again. They can help you draft those agreements and make sure everything's legit.
So it's like having a referee to make sure everyone's playing fair.
And that ties into certainty.
Yeah.
By having those clear agreements in place, you're reducing the chances of future conflict.
Right. It's all about creating stability, especially for the child.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Kaufman's framework is a good starting point, but it's not like a magic solution or anything,
Oh, yeah. There are always going to be challenges when it comes to child support.
especially if there's a lot of tension between the parents.
But even then, having this framework can help, you know? It can guide your decisions and help you stay focused on what really matters.
Which is the well-being of the child.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's say just for a second, we're the listener. We're going through separation. Things are messy. We're trying to figure out this child support stuff.
Okay, I like this. Let's walk through it.
So first things first, we got to consult, right?
Yep. Find a good lawyer who knows family law inside and out.
Someone who can explain all the legal mumbo jumbo in plain English.
Exactly. Once we've got that covered, we move on to communicate.
Which might be tough given the whole messy separation thing.
True, but we got to try, right? Even if it's through our lawyers, we need to understand each other's perspectives.
And figure out what we both consider fair.
Once we've had those initial conversations, we can move on to create.
Start brainstorming those alternative child support arrangements.
Thinking about our child's needs, our own financial situations.
Trying to find a solution that works for everyone.
Maybe one of us covers healthcare, the other handles education. Who knows?
The point is to be open to different possibilities.
And once we've reached an agreement, we need to make sure it's solid, which is where certainty comes in.
Get everything in writing, all nice and legal.
Yep, and again, our lawyer can help with that.
Make sure everything is airtight.
So even in a tough situation like this, Kaufman's 4 C's can be helpful.
It's a good reminder that even when things are rough, you can still make decisions that benefit your child.
Create a more stable and secure future for them.
Exactly, and that's a pretty powerful message.
So we've covered Kaufman's 4 C's, consult, communicate, create, and certainty. We even walked through a hypothetical situation to see how it might work.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty solid approach for handling child support negotiations.
But there's one thing that keeps bugging me.
What's that?
We've talked a lot about the legal and financial stuff. But what about the kid in all this? Like, what's the emotional impact on them?
Oh, that's a really good point. It's easy to forget about that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, how do kids even perceive these negotiations? Do they pick up on the tension between their parents when money's being discussed?
It's hard to say for sure. Every kid's different, every family's different, but kids are pretty perceptive, right?
Yeah, they definitely pick up on more than we realize.
So even if we try to shield them from the details, they're probably sensing the stress and conflict underneath.
Which can't be good for them, especially when they're already dealing with so much change.
Exactly. It can create a lot of anxiety and insecurity.
So what can parents do to minimize that? Like, how can we protect our kids emotionally during this process?
Well, it goes back to those C's we've been talking about. It starts with communication, not just between the parents, but with the child, too.
So talking to them about what's going on.
Yeah, in an age-appropriate way, of course. Explaining that mom and dad are living apart, but they both still love them very much.
And that they're both committed to taking care of them.
Right. And that these child support discussions are about making sure they have everything they need.
So they understand it's not about one parent being better than the other.
Exactly. It's about framing it in a positive light, emphasizing that these decisions are being made with their best interests at heart.
And making sure they know it's not their fault.
Oh, absolutely. Kids often blame themselves in these situations, so it's crucial to reassure them that this is an adult matter.
And that they're loved unconditionally no matter what.
Exactly. Now, what about those alternative child support arrangements, like directly contributing to expenses? How might that affect the kid?
Hmm, that's an interesting question.
I think it could actually be a positive thing. If the child sees both parents actively involved in providing for them, it reinforces that sense of security and support.
Yeah, like instead of just getting a check, they see mom taking them to the doctor or dad paying for their soccer uniform.
Exactly. It makes the connection between the financial contribution and the child's well-being more tangible.
But there's also the potential for conflict, right? What if the parents disagree on how those expenses are being handled?
That's true, which is why communication and clear agreements are so important.
It's all about setting those boundaries up front.
And remembering that the child's well-being comes first. Always.
So I guess the big takeaway here is that child support is complicated.
It's not just about the money. It's about the emotional impact on everyone involved, especially the child.
And while there's no easy solution, Coffin's 4Cs give us a good place to start.
Yeah, they provide a framework for approaching these conversations in a more thoughtful and strategic way.
And by keeping the child's emotional well-being at the forefront of our minds, we can hopefully navigate this process in a way that benefits everyone.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power in these situations. The more you understand your rights and options, the better decisions you can make for your child.
So keep learning, keep those lines of communication open, and remember, it's all about what's best for the kid.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
We hope you found it informative and helpful. And until next time, keep diving deep.